we got a fantastic show lined up, ladies and gentlemen. We are welcoming Mr. Mike Ricksecker to the show, and he is an author, researcher, and filmmaker. He's been featured on Travel Channel's The Alaskan Triangle, History Channel's Ancient Aliens and the Unexplained, and Animal Planet's The Haunted, Gaia TV, and many more. And he is here to talk about all kinds of amazing things, as well as his new book, Travels Through Time, Inside the Fourth Dimension, Time Travel, and Stacked Time Theory. So, I don't know about you guys, but I'm pumped to get into this, so let's get to it. Hey everybody, and welcome to the Paranormal Portal Podcast. I'm your host, Brent Thomas. Thank you all for joining us, and special thank you goes out to all of you who continue to support the podcast and continue to spread the word. Always remember, if any of you out there have experiences of your own that you'd like to share, feel free to email me at paranormalportalradio@gmail.com. Again, paranormalportalradio@gmail.com, and you too could be a guest on the show. Mike, welcome to the show. It's a thrill to have you on.
Yeah, Brent, I really appreciate being here today. Looking forward to talking with you today.
Yeah, me too. You've been all over the place. You've been on several networks and done shows. You are an author. You have a podcast, Connecting the Universe. First of all, I know it's kind of a canned intro, and I apologize for this in advance, but I'm always curious where the journey started for someone. So do you mind, where did this start for you?
Yeah, absolutely. For me, it starts way back when I was a child. I was an experiencer. It's what we would call a shadow person incident. Woke up in the middle of the night one night, and there's this tall, dark shadow standing in the corner of my room.
Oh.
And, had no idea, of course, about shadow people, shadow entities, anything like that at the time. I just thought there was an intruder in the house, and it was about to kill me, or maybe at least rob the place. But,
right.
Your mind goes to all kinds of places as a kid. And so, that was really the first, primary significant paranormal incident that I had as a child. It actually did get physical with me.
Oh.
It approached my bed, leaned over. I'm not trying to scream, but I'm so scared at the time that nothing's coming out of my mouth. And I'm staring up into this blank black face. There's nothing there, no eyes, no nose, no mouth, just as it's leaning over. And it did something really unusual. Grabbed me by the wrists, crossed my arms across my body, and ran off down the hall, and of all places into a closet. I have no idea why I ran into the closet. But by that point, I found my voice, found my legs, ran off screaming to my parents' bedroom, and they're trying to calm me and console me, tell me, and I'm telling them what happened, but they're trying to tell me I had a bad dream, and I knew I hadn't had a bad dream. This really happened. We've never called that a haunted house. We lived there for 10 years, and that was really the only significant incident like that ever happened. The next house that we moved into after that, we had moved back to Ohio after 10 years there in Massachusetts. In the house that we moved into, I'm unpacking boxes, putting things away in my new room, and I kept seeing this figure in the doorway, and I turned and looked, and off it would go, running toward my parents' bedroom. And this happened like several times over the, first few days that we were there, and I finally kind of threw up my hands. I'm like, all right, I have no idea what's going on here. And I went and told my mother. Now I was 13 at the time, and maybe she thought I was a little more mature than I was at 8. I don't know how mature a 13-year-old really is, but I know I was pretty immature at 13, but still, she thought me mature enough to admit to me that she had seen the same thing. And what was great about this was, one, was affirmation that, okay, I'm not crazy. Mom has seen this thing too. And two, she didn't really seem very alarmed about it. So if Mom's not alarmed about it, I don't have anything to worry about. So I got playful with this thing. I started calling him Tom, like Peeping Tom. He'd peep in my room. I think, hi, Tom. Now off he'd go. And that activity lasted for about 3-4 months there. And then kind of just really subsided. So I chalked it up to, okay, something was there at the house, was checking out the new family, deemed that we were okay, and went about its business. So these were the things that like really first piqued my interest in the paranormal, supernatural world. My mom had gotten me a book by Hans Holzer when we moved out of Massachusetts called Yankee Ghost, and started reading it. I'm like, oh, these stories, they're actually true. They're actually real. They realized that as I was first starting to read through the first story. By the second one, I'm like, these are actually true. So that was really fascinating to me. And then when I was a freshman in high school, we're talking 1989, to kind of date myself here, I had my first little paranormal investigation, not knowing at all that that's what I was doing, because we didn't have the ghost shows or anything like that back then. We had In Search of with Leonard Nimoy, which is more late 70s, early 80s.
Yeah.
But that was really about it. You might see old episodes of The Twilight Zone, but those are stories, those are fiction. We didn't have the ghost hunting shows. So no idea what we were doing. My friend David and I were at our friend Lori's house one day, and we're in the living room shooting the breeze, teen drama, that sort of thing. And all of a sudden Lori says, I think my house is haunted. And David and I are like, oh, well, cool. Okay, do tell, what's going on? So she starts telling us about, there's the old family cemetery that's in the backyard, because there's a historic house in the downtown of the town that we lived in. And she's talking about all these different things that happen around the house. But her main concern was the wall in her bedroom, or at least one of the walls in her bedroom. Because every time she would tack something up on there, we're in high school, so posters and things like that, it would always fall down. Like whether it was an hour, a day, a week later, whatever, it would always fall down. So she can't keep anything tacked on her. So it was the haunted wall. And so David and I go upstairs. We're going to investigate. So we get up there, we're taking a look at the wall. Lori's telling us some more stories. And I didn't know this about David at the time. He was a very sensitive guy, like sensitive to spiritual energy. And he put his hand flat to the wall like that. And all of a sudden he turned this bright, bright red and started sweating profusely. And look at David like, oh my God, what the heck is going on? I'd never seen anything like this before. So he starts going wall to wall in the house, touching them all, trying to find the different kind of quote unquote hot spots. And it was that moment that I knew that I had no idea what it was, what we were doing, anything of that nature, except it was related to something supernatural. But I knew somehow, some way, shape, or form I was going to be involved with that arena for the rest of my life.
That's pretty cool. Those experiences, like the initial shadow person, those really confound me, because they're, some hauntings make sense. Well, this tragedy happened, or this happened, or, something tied to the property or the land. And generally speaking, I mean, they're not on a schedule, but there's a repetition involved. But you having this really strange but horrible one-off experience, and then nothing after that is it always, I don't know, makes my head spin. It's like, what is going on in those situations?
Yeah, in those situations. So, there's a difference between that first experience that I had and that second one that lasted for months. These were two different entities. Even though they both came off as a type of shadow, they were different. The first one was very, very solid. He, if you want to call it a he,
sure,
could have been a she. It really was kind of an it. We'll get to that in a moment. But yeah, no fear, came right up to me. I had fear, but it was very interactive, that sort of thing. Got physical with me before it decided to run off. The other one was more translucent in nature. Like, I could see through it a bit and see the hallway in my parents' bedroom down the hall, the railing for the stairs, all that sort of stuff. And it was very, very fast, because it would just take off out of there whenever you turn and look at this thing. So it was not interactive at all. So, we're talking about two different entities here that are using what we'd say is like a similar energetic modality to enter into our plane of existence. And one was certainly stronger than the other. So a couple of years ago, I had a hypnotic regression. I wanted to find out more about that original incident, because over the years, of course, I'm talking with people about it. I'm, on the road, giving presentations, collecting information before I published my book, A Walk in the Shadows. And Walk in the Shadows was really an important work for me as I not only explored my own experiences with this phenomena, but also getting a gauge for what other people had been experiencing. And so some interesting ideas along the years, whether they were psychic mediums or other people that I talked to, that I thought was an interesting one, because it was a couple different people suggesting this exclusive of each other, was maybe it thought that I was dead and was putting me into some sort of burial pose, like, crick and flail out of ancient Egypt, that sort of thing. I was like, oh, that's an interesting idea. So maybe it wasn't necessarily attacking me. Maybe it was, honoring me like that. It was an interesting idea, and I played with that for a while. But, it just became time that I need to find out what the heck happened.
Yeah.
So went through this hypnotic regression. Ariana Corsino, who certified hypnotherapist, trained under Dolores Cannon, very, very good. We went and experienced a past life, which was interesting, but then we focused on that incident from when I was 8 years old. And what was fascinating about this was she was able to actually channel this being, basically be able to bring that being into the conversation and talk and have a conversation with it. And when I got to see the scenario again in my bedroom when I was 8, I didn't actually see it from my own perspective. I saw it from the perspective of the shadow, which was really bizarre, because it's like I'm in the corner standing up and staring down at my little 8-year-old self, which was wild to actually see that in this hypnosis session. And so I got to see, myself look up at the shadow and, try to scream and my mouth open and all of that. And what was fascinating was I got to feel the emotions of the entity there as well. And I got to understand its thoughts. So essentially what we got out of this, the conversation here, was that, for one, it was not trying to scare me. It actually felt bad when it realized that, it was scaring me. So the whole idea of like crossing my arms and that sort of thing it was trying to put me into like a self-hug to calm me down. I got to see like this little pat on my wrist, like, hey, it's okay. And it ran off so it could get out of there and stop scaring me. So, really, really different perspective. So then, of course, the questions start to come, where are you from and why are you here? Why are you even, in this room, even though you're accidentally, scaring this kid? Because it basically didn't realize until I reacted that I could see it. So it was there from, it said it was from another space. And Ariana followed up with, well, do you mean like another dimension? And it responded with, you might call it another dimension, but really it's another space, which kind of tells us that our science is it doesn't completely understand what we mean when we talk about other dimensions.
Right.
But still, for lack of a better term, we'll call it another dimension. And it was there on a research mission to study humanity. And it was assigned that night to my room to study a human child. And, didn't realize that I could see it until, I reacted to it. And then it tried to calm me down, which actually just frightened me even more. So a very, very different perspective of what really happened, on that occasion. Yeah, it's going to completely frighten me as a child. Mm-hmm. But now having an idea of going back and getting a glimpse of it, the intrusion, of course, is not cool. Certainly creepy if you see these things. But it kind of also tells us that we don't completely understand what it is that we are witnessing when we see these things.
Right. No, I think that's brilliant. Throughout the history of the shows, I've covered several shadow people stories, and while some people regard them, and maybe they're entirely different entities, but some people regard them as incredibly dangerous and aggressive, and they're not good. Get them, try to get them out of your space or whatever. And then other people have experiences much like your own that are very benign, just standing in a corner and observing for whatever measure. And I have to wonder, in your experience being so young, if that was why you could perceive it, because of course, it's a real common phenomena that children are able to, see and interact with spirits much more readily than adults, and, for whatever reasons that may be. But it's definitely a phenomena that repeats itself. So maybe being so much younger was why that you could observe it readily. That's incredibly interesting. Wow.
Yeah. You got a couple of things there. First I want to address, you mentioned that, yes, some people do have, some more, most of the stories, they are benign when you look at it, and get a closer glimpse of it. You are going to have some that are mean, nasty, nefarious, but then you have some that are benevolent. There's a woman that emailed me yesterday that a shadow person saved her from getting hit by a train.
Oh, wow.
That just pulled her off. It was a subway train, and something was pulling her. She was too close to the platform. As it was a high-speed train, as it was coming through, it was pulling her too close to the track and the train, and this thing pulled her back. And she could see that it was a shadow, and then when the incident ended, there was nobody there. She was completely alone.
Wow.
So somebody had saved her from there. Another friend of mine had been in an old abandoned abbey in Ireland. She starts falling down the stairs. Hand reached out and grabbed her. It was this hooded shadow figure. Well, you're in an abandoned abbey in Ireland. It's probably a monk, right?
Right.
But it's just coming off as a shadow. And so, when we look at shadow people, they are a variety of different things. They can be a human spirit that doesn't fully manifest as an apparition. They can be an interdimensional being. They can be an extraterrestrial. They can be some sort of astral projection, a time traveler. It just really depends on the situation. People tend to fear what they don't understand. So when they see, dark being or whatever, their mind, usually when it shows up in your room, the first thing is kind of like what I thought when I was a kid. There's an intruder in the house. But when you figure out and finally determine it wasn't an intruder, what was it? Oh, it was a shadow person. They must be up to something nasty and nefarious. But most times, they're just standing there watching and observing. To what you had mentioned. I'm trying to remember what it was.
The scene
right.
For the young children.
Oh, yes, the scene for the young children. Right. So you have people that, like for me, I see more shadows than I see apparitions. I will see apparitions too, but I tend to see more shadows than apparitions. Other people, it's the reverse. I'll see more apparitions than shadows. Some people don't really see much of anything. They may get a little glimpse of something, but they never see anything fully formed. So, the question becomes why? Why is that? Well, for young kids, I think one of the things that matters is, they're newly into this world. They've just returned from, that spirit realm. So the frequency of their consciousness, because everything's energy, resonance, frequency, vibration, is still in tune a bit with that beyond. Whether you call it another dimension, call it heaven, call it the home world, whatever it is, right? The outside the simulation, whatever you want to call it, it's still more in tune to that. As we get older, we kind of fall out of tune with that. But things can happen throughout our life that can kind of almost like retune us or tune our frequency in a certain direction. So that happened to me at a very young age when I was 8 and saw that first shadow entity. I was able to kind of tune into the world of the shadows a bit. And so when one of those types of entities kind of enters my sphere, it's like my personal resonance recognizes that and tunes into it. So there's a fascinating incident that kind of helped me with this line of research. It happened some years back now. I'd been running a string of paracons there for a few years out of the Mineral Springs Hotel in Alton, Illinois. It's a fantastic historic building. There's a lot of shops, like metaphysical shops and clothing shops, things like that within it. It's kind of like a little mall these days. But there's still the abandoned part of the hotel. on the top floor. And running a paranormal investigation out of there. There's also an abandoned pool there, which is really cool. That's down a level. But we're upstairs, and we're in the front corner suite, which is known as Pearl's room, to confirm suicide. Very sad story. And we're up there doing an EVP session. There's just a handful of us left following this event. And as we're going through this EVP session, all of a sudden we start hearing some noises from down the hall. So I go out and take a look. I'm looking down the hall, and all of a sudden I see this smoke start to billow up from down the hallway. And, first thought, is it on fire? I'm not smelling anything.
Yeah.
I don't smell anything burning, but, the smoke is coming closer and closer. But then it starts to do something really unusual. It starts to creep up the wall on the right-hand side, creep back down, creep back up. All the while it's coming closer and closer. And then all of a sudden, one of those times that it crept up that wall, it morphed into the apparition of a little girl.
Oh.
By then, everybody else had joined me, and there's 5 of us there. We all see this apparition of this little girl. And we're trying to coax her closer and closer. We're like, come on, come closer. And she stopped right at this doorway in the middle of the hall where that particular room, a lot of people had said that they had witnessed and experienced the spirit of a little girl. There was, they have teddy bears and toys and all kinds of stuff set up in that room. Here we are seeing her right outside that doorway. And she wouldn't pass that doorway. She wouldn't come any closer. What was really interesting, 2 things to take out of this. One, this certainly helped with the idea that some of these shadows that we see are human spirits, because got to see the shadow smoke morph into an apparition. Okay, there we go. But secondly, we all saw her a little bit differently. So I saw her fully formed from her head on down to about her knees, and then she dissipated away. Others saw her fully formed at the feet on up, and then she started to dissipate away at the head. So the question is, okay, why is that? Why did we all see her a little bit differently? Again, frequency, resonance, energy, and vibration. So the human body resonates anywhere from about 9 to 16 hertz, and everybody's a little bit different. Well, and then the entity there is going to have its own personal resonance as well. Mm-hmm. So it's a matter of kind of that tuning into it. So, let's say maybe I was resonating at 10, the entity was resonating at 11, and my buddies over here were at 13 or 14. So we're going to see this differently. So I hope that's fascinating. Like the answer.
No, I'm absolutely enthralled by that, because I think that's incredible, because you're all perceiving the same events, but for whatever reasons your filters are processing it differently, and I like that. I think that's powerful, and maybe that's why, as she was going out of resonance for you, that's why the legs faded away. But for someone else, they saw the feet and legs, and then as it went up, it was out of phase for them, and I think that's an incredible take. I've never heard that before, but I love that. And I wonder if that's similar to disembodied sounds, where, 3 people can be together, and suddenly there's a scream that only 2 of the 3 heard. Well, why is that? Well, maybe it's the same thing, that the sound was only perceivable through that resonance, energy, and frequency that you're talking about to 2 of those people, but not the 3rd. Ah.
Yeah, absolutely. It's very, very similar there. And you're talking that there's a lot of different factors here.
Sure.
If it's a disembodied scream that came from, well, where did it come from? Does it come from another dimension, come from another point in time? Is this something residual that was embedded in the wall that kicked off? I mean, there's a lot of different things that it could be. But again, it's, sound is on another different wavelength. And so that's why sometimes, we might see some sort of strange phenomena and not hear it at all.
Mm-hmm.
And then, conversely, hear it and not see it, because we're talking different wavelengths. And again, we are, as an individual, picking up those things a little bit differently. I see and hear things differently than other people, just naturally, even in our regular environment here. We each take in light into our eyes a little bit differently. You know, some people are colorblind.
Sure.
But you know, the way my eyes work is different than, you know, my son who has 20/10 vision and can read like the copyright at the very bottom of the eye chart. You know?
That's amazing.
So he has a very different perception of the world than I do just from that. So yeah.
I think that's fascinating because I always chalked it up to, you know, maybe telepathy, but I think that does put a different spin on it. And I like that because, you know, quite honestly, this has been a journey of understanding for me as well. That's what drove me to do these shows is I want to understand this stuff because I think it's incredibly important to understand the incredibly dynamic nature of reality and our role in it. I think that's what a lot of this stuff really brings to light. If you get past the shock factor and the skepticism and stuff and actually look into the mechanics of what could be happening, I think it's, you know, very much like Tesla alluded to, that when we start really researching the non-physical, we're going to make a lot of strides, you know, and this is definitely the, you know, quote unquote non-physical. That's fascinating.
Yeah, absolutely. And even, telepathy. I mean, it's just another wavelength, is being able to tune into those wavelengths to be able to, you know, take in whatever that message or information is. And Tesla's a great example because he was tapped into, well, what Carl Jung called the collective unconscious, what some people call the Akashic records. I call it eternal knowledge. Everybody will sit there and argue over what exactly that is, but basically it's the information of the universe that's all there and accessible to us. And yeah, Tesla had that open mind. He had been, as a young man back in Serbia, had been playing around with astral projection, so he was definitely in tune to a lot of these different concepts, and he was pulling down all kinds of information that was far ahead of his time. And when he would try to implement it or talk about the concepts, people were laughing him out of the room. But we have so much of that technology today that he was talking about, you know, 140 years ago.
Wow. That is fascinating. And it's interesting, you know, that so much of this, also this paranormal stuff does seem to have relevance to maybe the mechanics of time, which maybe is a good segue into your book, Travels Through Time, Inside the Fourth Dimension, Time Travel and Stacked Time Theory. I find that absolutely fascinating, and I haven't read it yet, but I'm excited to. Can you give us kind of a, you know, 30,000 foot view of what this book encompasses?
It's interesting you mentioned 30,000 foot view because I'm going to give an analogy here from an airplane. So when we talk time travel, what I call stacked time theory, we need to first address, you know, the nature of time. What is it? Well, time doesn't really exist. It's a human construct that we've come up with to describe our reality. It's a measuring tool. Helps us plant the crops, to know when the seasons are going to change, when to jump on or show up at the bus stop at the right moment, show up to work at the right moment, so our supervisors don't get upset with us. So it's useful in a lot of regards, but it in and of itself doesn't really exist. So when we use the analogy of the river of time, okay, time is the water within the river, but the water isn't making itself flow. What's making it flow is the banks that are holding the water in. There's a little bit of gravity because there's a little bit of a pitch, but the banks are holding that water in and making that flow downstream. If you remove the banks, all that water will spill out into a giant stagnant pond or lake, and you'll be able to see all that water right there. So the river of time works in our regards, and we are stuck in those constraints. Whatever the rules or parameters of the universe have been put in place, that's what's keeping the banks in place. Another way to look at this is take a town that you're driving through. And we'll say, you know, you're driving through at about 35 miles per hour. There's a couple of houses, a general store, a gas station, a church, these sorts of things. And maybe it takes you 10 minutes to drive through the town. Okay, so you have a relationship in time with this town. Now, let's say instead of driving through it, you are flying in an airplane overhead, and you see all at once the houses, the gas station, the church, the store, all there at the same moment. So what you once had a relationship with in time, you now have a relationship in space because it's all there. So that's the idea here when we're talking about how time really works. Our dimensional spaces, we have up to 11 hyperspatial dimensions. Where we are at, what we call time, is the fourth dimension, but it's really where our consciousness resides. And that makes us very interesting beings because our fourth dimensional consciousness is inside our third dimensional body. You're able to see and interact with all the dimensions that are below you, which means all the dimensions that are above you, fifth, sixth, seventh, and onward, will be able to experience time like an object, like we experience a three-dimensional object, like the computer mouse in front of me, that sort of thing. So if all time is here right now and concurrent, take where you're sitting right now. Every moment that has happened, is happening, and will happen are all there. Each moment like a photograph in a giant stack of photographs at that location. And sometimes, because again, everything's frequency, resonance, energy, vibration, sometimes two of those moments will resonate at the same frequency for a brief moment, and they'll kind of bleed into each other. And that's where we get what we call a time slip. And that can very well account for a number of these different hauntings that we experience. When we see a ghost, is actually what we are experiencing is another moment in time. We might be looking back or forward, and conversely, they might be looking back or forward.
I love that. That was one of the things I was planning on mentioning to you, because I've again, through the course of this shows, I've covered so many stories that are like that, where people see the ghost in the basement and the ghost sees them, and both parties are like,
right,
looking absolutely mortified. And it occurred to me as well, that same thing. It's like, maybe we're the ghost to them as they're the ghost to us. And that's fascinating to me. That analogy is perfect. It's perfect. One of my favorite stories to tell about that is, the Conjuring house. I don't know if you've had Andrea Perrin on your show, good friend of mine. And, what happened there at that house that the first Conjuring movie was based off of, was very different than what really happened there. So the thing that the major incident that had happened there was not a possession and an exorcism. It was really a seance that had gone bad. Those hauntings lasted the entire 10 years that they lived there, and still things happen there to this day. But after that seance, in which Carolyn had gotten knocked out of her chair in the dining room, thrown back into the parlor, and then the Warrens were asked to leave. It was a couple weeks later, and she was still kind of recovering from all of that. Andrea was up doing her homework in the parlor this particular night. Carolyn got up and asked Andrea, well, I haven't eaten all day. Can you heat up some of that beef stew from dinner and put on a short pot of coffee for me? And so Andrea's like, yeah, I'm going to help Mom. I'll go ahead and take care of that. So she goes to do that. Carolyn sits down there in the parlor, and she's looking out into the dining room, and all of a sudden morphing into existence is this family like out of the 1700s. There's a woman cooking over an open hearth. In that particular fireplace at that point in time, it had been boarded up for like 100 years, but there it is, open and fire going, the woman's cooking, a couple of kids running around. There's two gentlemen sitting at a table with pewter steins, and they turn and they look right at Carolyn. And the one guy kind of nudges the other and points over at Carolyn and says, well, would you look at that? Again, as if she was the ghost. So, yeah, you had two moments in time that were experiencing each other here for just a brief moment. That's incredible. Yeah, I hadn't heard that. And no, she hasn't been on the show yet, but I'd certainly love to talk to her.
You'd love to have her.
Yeah.
And she says, she'll tell you that out of all the crazy things that happened at that house, that one's the most fascinating.
That she not only saw them, but was able to hear what they were saying in that moment. And the curious part of that, and this is maybe a spider web of the topic, but how much do you think we are involved in those processes? Because a lot of times in the paranormal, people seem like they're victims of these circumstances they couldn't possibly control. But I've pondered the idea that maybe we are really facilitating that on perhaps a subconscious level. Maybe it's an energetic shift in our awareness that we become aware of these events, and then, the ghost dissipating and disappearing maybe is our awareness closing back down due to the shock or whatever of it. You know what I mean? Does that make sense, or am I?
Yeah, I get what you're saying. I think a lot of times, we inadvertently do this, and we're certainly not aware of how, in many of these cases. I think if we really understood truly how to do these things, then we'd be doing it all the time.
Sure.
And I think like real time travel is going to have more to do with meditation and the consciousness rather than like a DeLorean and flux capacitor. And, it will take, setting that intention and then, getting on the right frequency to be able to move between those two moments. But then, okay, even if you do that, you have like that slip there, like at the Conjuring House, how do you hold it? How do you maintain it? Because, you're going to have that initial shock, right? Oh my gosh, what's going on? And then you kind of lose the moment.
Yeah.
Great example is the famous German poet Goethe. He's walking down the road one day, headed toward the town of Dressenheim, this is in Germany, and he's having an affair there with a young woman. He's kind of lost in his thoughts, thinking about the situation. He recounts this story in one of his books, true story here. And he's lost in his thoughts, thinking about her. All of a sudden, he notices this gentleman walking on the other side of the road in this gold-trimmed gray suit. So he turns to get a better look at the guy, and also completely vanishes. He's like, what in the world was that? Where'd the guy go? We can't do anything about it, so he keeps heading down the road to Dressenheim. It's a couple years later. It's like not even, the next day or anything. It's like years later. He's walking down the road again in the opposite direction, heading from Dressenheim. And he's coming up on that spot where that incident happened. And it dawns on him, oh, this is where that guy disappeared. And then he's like, oh, wait a minute. I saw myself. I'm wearing the gold trimmed gray suit. It was myself that I saw the whole time. Wow. If you Google doppelganger cases, this shows up as a doppelganger case, but it's, the whole idea of evil twin, that sort of thing. This really wasn't that. It was him witnessing himself at another moment in time. It was a time slip. So then the question is, okay, what was the catalyst? Well, he said at the very beginning of the story that he was lost in his thoughts, which is, a type of meditative state. We do it all the time, driving down the road, we zone out, we miss our exit. Oh, man, turn around and go back and make the right turn the next time. It's not a full meditative state because, we don't want to be in a full meditative state while driving. We wreck the car, but it's still a type of meditative state. And I think what happened was while he was in that state, you're entering into a different type of brainwave state in your head. And so I think he was able to tune into himself at another moment in time when he was in that state of meditation. And then once he noticed this guy and tried to, get a better look at him, it broke that meditative state and it disappeared.
Now that's interesting because, and I guess for me, I keep thinking about this and I agree. I think that, the whole space-time thing is already, formed. But does that imply then predestination, or do you think that choice still weighs heavily in how these events develop in our perception of time?
Yeah, still always in motion is the future. Yeah, it doesn't negate free will.
Okay.
Not to be sappy or anything.
Oh, no.
But if we don't have free will, we can't have love. Oh. So I think that's the thing in this world that really shows us that we do, have free will, because if it's a pre-programmed automatic setting or whatever, that I'm going to be with this person. That's not really love.
Right.
So it's a choice that we're making along the way. What I think ends up happening here, we can still make those choices up and down the timeline, but then there are modifications that are made along the way. And there are things that we see and we witness sometimes that we're kind of scratching our heads about because like we had a different memory of something that occurred, like the Mandela effect, where a lot of those cases, you have people all across the world that are saying, I remembered this thing or that thing in a very different fashion. Now, a lot of it has to do with like branding, like the spelling of Fruit Loops or Oscar Mayer or these sorts of things.
Sure.
And, I'm not saying somebody went back in time and changed branding, like the cornucopia with Fruit of the Loom, whatever. That's too trivial. But as we have these interactions up and down the timeline, it does change some things. And so you have these ripple effects. So there may have been something that occurred, that got changed a couple hundred years ago that eventually the ripple effect is the artist for the Fruit of the Looms decided, not to put the cornucopia this time for whatever reason.
Right.
So, but yeah, we do see effects of the future interacting with the past to change things along the timeline.
Yeah.
So we have a paradox. It's just time resolving itself to keep things going.
That's interesting. And I'm glad that you brought that up because I think, many people in the psychology field would say, oh, it's a memory glitch. It's just a standard thing. And if it was just, a few people experiencing it, maybe could get on board with that. But the fact that it's entire segments of the population remembering things quite differently. So either it's a shared delusion somehow, or they really are recalling something changing, the lion laying down with the lamb and versus the wolf now, apparently, from biblical records and such. And it just blows people away. And there's got to be something to that. So I'm glad that you brought that up because, it's pretty amazing. I mean, with a lot of paranormal phenomena, there does seem to be a real strong time element to it. But even between phenomena, they are very similar, whether it's cryptozoology or UFOs or ghosts or, you name it. They all seem to have shared characteristics. And, the whole appearing, disappearing, walking through walls. There's plenty of abductees who have been, sucked through windows. They could feel themselves going through, and it does seem to have dimensional aspects to all of them. So, and I'm using these terms loosely as I'm just a layman, probably don't know the correct nomenclature for it all, but I do still find it incredibly fascinating that even though they're disparate phenomena, they do share many similar characteristics. What do you make of that?
Yeah, well, that's why I have my whole connected universe platform. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, everything's connected. Whether it's ghosts, ETs, interdimensional beings, cryptids, all of it. It is all connected because the universe is here. The whole thing is here, all at once. So we are interconnected. Energetically and, really physically to everything else across the universe. There's a fantastic X-ray image of the universe that was put up by the Chandra X-ray telescope about 15 years ago. That's, it just looks like a giant spider web and you're looking at it. What in the world am I looking at? It's got these, very bright yellow dots, different sizes kind of strewn about, and they're all connected with these different filaments. It looks like a giant spider web, but this is the universe though. All of those bright yellow dots of different shapes and sizes are actually galaxies, and the filaments that you're seeing are the gaseous filaments throughout the universe, connecting everything together. So we are physically connected to each other, and so along those lines, we are also energetically connected to everything. And we'll see as we go further and further and further into our mysteries of the universe, that all of this phenomenon is very, very intricately connected, and it's just kind of the universe, playing itself out in different ways.
Oh, that's a fascinating example, and I really appreciate that because I've seen the X-ray image that you're talking about, and then the comparison to the neurons in a brain, and they really are like interchangeable, and that's fascinating that the macrocosm would mimic the microcosm, and it's like this loop. For lack of a better term, is it like, is that what happens? Like as you go deeper, you're going bigger, and
well, it is the loop. One of the things that I dive into in the book's Travels Through Time is our first alchemical symbol, the Ouroboros, the snake eating its own tail. And that was a symbol of the ancient world for constant recycle and renewal. So, they use this, of course, for, the afterlife, to symbolize that, we're going to return. They use it to symbolize the renewal and recycling of the planet, but also for the universe. And what I have found fascinating about this, of all the things that I could relate that symbol to, was actually the research that they've been doing down in Antarctica lately with the Anita Project and the Ice Cube Project, where they've detected neutrinos running in reverse without a source, coming up out of the Earth. Now, they're supposed to be collecting neutrinos from space to be able to research our solar system, which they did, and they created this fascinating map of the solar system from the neutrinos that they were grabbed. But here is neutrinos running in reverse without a source. And the scientists themselves, in this peer-reviewed paper that came out a couple of years ago now, they stated that this was indicative of a parallel universe running in reverse time. So for whatever reason, I made this connection between that statement and this symbol, because when you look at the Ouroboros, the snake eating its own tail, the way it's usually illustrated, you see two tracks. There's an underbelly, and then there's the top side of the serpent. Great example would be the one Theodorus Pelicanos from the 1400s. Red and green are the two colors. And I likened this whole thing to parallel universes running in reverse, superimposing that idea onto the Ouroboros, where you have, say, the underbelly is running backwards, and you have the outer skin of the serpent running forward. Where do they meet? Because you're going to have the beginning of the one is the end of the other, and vice versa, and they're going to collide at some point. Well, that's where the head and the tail meet, where the mouth is biting the tail. To me, that's representative of the Big Bang. I think the ancients knew this information already. And so their idea of duality, as above, so below, those Hermetic principles are played out in this symbol. And science is just catching up to it. So the question of, okay, what was the universe before the Big Bang? It's the universe. What's going to be after? It'll be the universe. I don't think it'll form up exactly the same. But yeah, I think we're just always recycling, renewing again and again and again in a constant loop.
That's fascinating, because I caught mention of something that I thought was really interesting, and I think it has to do with the James Webb telescope, where they finally could look towards the I don't know, the origin point or whatever of the early universe, right after it happened, and allegedly, and I don't understand the science of it, but they found remnants of what might have been the universe that preceded the Big Bang. So it's really fascinating that you say that, because it really does cross a lot of T's and dot a lot of I's, to the enigma of this, us understanding the universe around us. I think
there's a lot of fascinating things that have come out of James Webb telescope. It seems as we keep updating our technology, like they went and they looked at, okay, the farthest reaches of the universe, or the known universe, and they were a bit dumbfounded because their response was, oh, there's a lot more out there than what we expected.
Which is awesome. And,
yeah, it's great.
Yeah. You'd mentioned that the idea of the ancient ideas and such, and it's exciting to me that at least, I don't know, for a long time, our modern Western ideas of science and our development discarded the old. But it's funny how, as we progress, we're actually retroactively proving what our ancient ancestors knew. Oh, that's just such a great thing.
Yeah, there's Hemmeroff and Penrose, they've been doing some research on consciousness for many, many years, and they're talking about microtubules in the brain and stuff like that. So Penrose was the guy, like the Penrose stairs are named after him. He's a physicist. So anybody any of your listeners that are familiar with the movie Inception, those stairs that kind of are a paradox going around in a circle. So they were named after him. So these couple of physicists have stated that, that yes, there is a consciousness inside the body, and it does, reside within the body while we are alive. But when the body passes away, the consciousness goes elsewhere. They say it goes off into the cosmos. Now, they don't say where. And even Penrose is like, Roger Penrose, he'll say, religiously, I'm an atheist, but the consciousness does go somewhere. I just can't tell you where it goes, but it goes off. He says, I'll just say it goes off into the cosmos at this point. So it's like, wait a second. And so this is like big news, right? It makes headlines, newspapers, and, online magazines, stuff like that. Big news. Science is, proving that the consciousness exists and goes off into the cosmos. Like, wait a second here. Our religions and spirituality and, our spiritualism movement, all that stuff, they've been talking about this for thousands of years. This isn't news. It's nice that science is finally catching up to it.
Sure. Yeah, it really is. I think it's fascinating stuff. And, all of this is really cooking my bacon, but in an exceptional way because, throughout the course of doing this, I catch pieces and you catch snapshots. But I love how you've correlated this into a bigger picture and a cohesive picture that makes a hell of a lot of sense to me. That's just fascinating.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Like when it comes to the book, Travels Through Time, I think, at the surface, people look at it, okay, we're going to talk about the nature of time. And I think that just in a way sounds intimidating to them. Like, oh, it's going to be math and physics, all that sort of stuff. There is a little bit of that in
Sure.
But what I say about the book is, there's a lot of science in there without being too sciencey. There's a lot of metaphysics in there without being too metaphysical. Really at its heart, it's a philosophy book. But what I do is I incorporate a lot of pop culture references, so that it's a lot easier for people to understand and make it through. Like if I can relate to something that you've probably seen on television screen, or I've got some baseball references in there and things like that. If I can relate to some real world aspect that you're familiar with, then you probably have a better understanding of what in the world it is I'm talking about with all this.
No, I think it's wonderful. I'm really excited to read the book. I have to ask you, and I know we're running short on time, but is your next book dealing with space then? Because it seems like with things like quantum entanglement and such, it seems that if you had one portion of an atom in one section of the universe and another one clear across, and you move one, they would move synchronously, even though all of those millions of light years would be in between it. So it seems that space, too, may be non-Euclidean or whatever the correct terminology would be. Is that a fair assessment?
So, yeah, interesting thing about that is I have an uncle who is a retired physicist. And he was he came visiting this past October, was staying at my aunt's house, or it was September. Doesn't matter. But he was she's in the kitchen and he's kind of bugging her, trying to show her all this stuff on his phone. And she's like, I need to do stuff here in the kitchen. Here, why don't you take Mike's book? You'll like it. Go over there, sit down and read. So he read my book.
Oh, nice.
And when we got together for the family cookout and everything, he had like all these questions. And I'm like, oh boy, here it comes. I'm already sitting down with an actual physicist here and talking about some of these things. And he liked a lot of the ideas, a lot of the concepts. He was like, this is a really fascinating book, but I got a question for you about stack time. So I get what you're portraying here, but physically, if you're saying, take where you're sitting right now and all these moments of here, but physically, as we move through the universe, the universe is expanding. So where we were 10 years ago physically in the universe is not the same as where we are now. So how does this stack work when we're not even in the same physical place? And so I took a second there, kind of gather my thoughts. That's a good question, Uncle Bill. And then it hit me. Now, one word for you. Okay. Entanglement. Yeah, that'll work.
Oh, that's funny.
That's great.
That's awesome.
Great. Yeah.
And it's neat that, since he had that background, that he was still able to relate to that and come up with his own conclusions and such. But I was going to ask you something, but it's kind of gone from my head. But do you think that perhaps space, again, I'm throwing these big things at you, and I know the time is short, but do you think that perhaps as we understand the universe continues to grow, but is that somehow correlate to our consciousness expanding and therefore allowing us to, and I know that technology is always developing and gives us more of a window, but is it also in concert with consciousness? That as our idea of the universe expands, is it being manifest and therefore discovered? Because I think we are, in some major in powerful ways, manifesting the reality we experience. So what do you think of that? Yeah, in a way we are manifesting our experience, but I think the way in which we're manifesting it is that we are coming to better understand what is here in the universe. So again, the universe is whole. I mean, physically, we've mathematically shown that it's expanding out of the Big Bang. So physically, it is expanding. We are still connected to all of that. So we're physically connected to it. All the knowledge of the universe, like everything that we are going to discover, all time is concurrent. Everything is here. It's already out there for us to grab. It's a matter of understanding what that is and almost, kind of like being ready for it. A guy like Nikola Tesla, he was ready for things that the whole rest of the world was not. And he was his mind, his consciousness was able to expand, grab that information, essentially download it into his mind. We say download, but really it's already there. Right.
It's already here. It's just a matter of understanding it and opening that door to be able to receive it. And so I think it's more along those lines that everything that we need to know is here. And it's almost like, okay, pop culture reference, The Matrix, where the Oracle's telling Neo, you've already made the choice. You're just here to understand that choice. And so it's kind of the same thing with us. It's already here. We humans are a little bit slow on the uptake sometimes. It's taking a little bit for us to understand what these things are, but they're already there for us to grab.
Wow. Mike, this has been an incredible and mind-jarring experience for me, and I'm really so thrilled that we were able to connect and make this happen. I would love to have you back and continue this deep dive into this stuff, because I'm going to have millions of questions, and we're going to need a lot of hours to cover this. But yeah, I'd love to have you back. But could you take a couple minutes or whatever you need to let people know how to stay in touch with you, find your books, and check out all the projects you're involved in, as well as the podcast?
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, Brent, thank you so much for having me today. You can find me, my primary site is Ricksecker.com. You can find, my books and all that wonderful stuff out there. I have my, community and online learning portal, which is connecttheuniverseportal.com. We cover a lot of different topics out there. There's a great community back into that. So much, behind the scenes insider info, that members get access to there. As far as events and things like that, I have the Egypt tour coming up here in April. It's kind of last call for those registrations, but we'll take registrations up through the, middle to late March. If people want to jump on right at the end, they can. And, Stargates of Ancient Egypt,
wow.
too. So, yeah.
That's fascinating. And your podcast is available everywhere?
Yeah. Podcast Connecting the Universe. So the way that works is we have the public broadcast on YouTube Wednesday nights, 8:00 p.m. That's my YouTube channel, youtube.com/@Ricksecker. There is a members only after show that, people that are members of the Connected, Universe community have access to. And then the audio podcast goes out, the next morning. So that's available Spotify, iHeartRadio, iTunes, all those.
Sure. Well, that's wonderful, brother. Thank you so much. And it's been an extraordinary pleasure to have the chance to talk to you. Thank you, Mike.
Yeah. Thank you, Brent.
Get out! Guys, thank you so much for joining us here on tonight's show. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Please feel free to follow us on Facebook, facebook.com/Paranormal Portal Radio, as well as finding us on Twitter. We're on Twitter at Paranormal Portal, PORTL, and we'd love to have you stop by our YouTube page and subscribe and check out our shows there. We got hundreds of shows, Journeys into the Paranormal Portal, so I hope you'll check it out, guys. We're over there at youtube.com/Paranormal Portal, so hope to see you guys soon. We'll be back, of course, for more podcasts in the coming days. So we love you all. Be good, be kind, be nice. Take care of each other. Help each other out. Find the magic in every day. And remember to laugh as much as